Have you ever stopped to think that what you know about the Garden of Eden might be incomplete? What if I told you that the story we've heard since childhood of Adam, Eve, the serpent, and the fall may hide far more than a simple tale of disobedience? Imagine for a moment a place where there was no pain, no fear, no predators, where even lions fed only on plants, and work was not a burden but a joy. A world in perfect harmony, where every detail of creation reflected the goodness of the Creator. If this way of looking at Eden intrigues you, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. Here we uncover, with respect and depth, the mysteries that often go unnoticed, and the final insight in this video may change the way you read the Bible. At the heart of this world was the Garden of Eden, a real place, irrigated by ancient rivers whose course ran through fertile, life-filled lands. There, God placed the human being not as a prisoner but as a gardener, a partner in the work. Adam's work was not punishment. It was purpose, to care for, cultivate, and guard. This was part of his identity, a calling to take part in the beauty renewed at every dawn. Perhaps this is one of the first forgotten lessons. Work was created to give meaning, not to cause pain. How many times have you felt your work is heavy, exhausting, meaningless? In Eden, effort was tied to joy. Every seed planted was a promise. Every harvested fruit, gratitude. And the very earth responded generously, without thorns, without resistance, as if it celebrated alongside the mission of the first man. In the center of the garden there were two trees. One offered the knowledge of good and evil, and with it the test of obedience. The other, called the Tree of Life, held the mystery of immortality and eternal communion with God. Between these two trees, humanity stood before choices. One path led to the fullness of life, the other to the risk of loss. It wasn't just a rule, it was a doorway. Each decision shaped the heart. And have you noticed how our lives are also made of choices that seem small but change everything? Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes a no. Sometimes it's the silence that prevents a wound, or the word that rebuilds a bridge. Eden reminds us that freedom and responsibility walk together. But it wasn't only humans who lived in balance. All the animals, from the strongest to the most fragile, coexisted without violence. Lions rested beside deer. Birds perched without fear. Reptiles glided through the grass as if joining a silent choir. The air smelled of damp earth, clean water, new leaves. In the distance, the sound of the rivers met the bird's song, and no roar signaled a threat. Even the serpent, before the fall, had a different form. The sacred text suggests a world unlike ours, in which even the limits of nature obeyed a logic of peace. It's hard to imagine a planet without fear, but that's how Eden breathed. Without haste, without urgency, without the anxiety that so often tightens our chest. In this perfect setting, God brought before Adam creatures of every kind. One by one, he gave them names. They weren't random labels, but words that celebrated identity and purpose. To name was to see, to recognize, to embrace uniqueness. It was as if each sound spoken became a blessing upon the named being. And yet, in the midst of so much life, Adam perceived his solitude. Among all creatures there was beauty, but there was not an equal. So God offered a gift, Eve. Not a shadow, not an assistant, but a whole person, made with the same dignity, called to the same mission. When Adam saw her, silence turned into a poem. For the first time, humanity could share the language of wonder, the admiration for the work, the smile before the mystery. There was born not only a couple, but the first community, the first us. How long did that season last? The narrative marks neither days, nor weeks, nor years. Perhaps it was as brief as a sigh, perhaps as long as an endless summer. What matters is that the relationship was alive. At dusk, a breeze would blow, and in that breath, the presence of God walked through the garden. There were questions, discoveries, learning. There was the delight of existing without guilt. But the story also speaks of a decisive moment. In the shadow of the tree of knowledge, a voice asked, "Did God really say?" Doubt, subtle as mist, entered through the ears and reached desire. The fruit looked good, pleasant, desirable for gaining understanding. And suddenly, The trust that kept the world in harmony was exchanged for a hurried calculation. What was clear grew cloudy. What was simple became complicated. When trust breaks, the heart hides. Adam and Eve found themselves naked, not of skin but of security. They stitched leaves, built defenses, invented explanations. Fear appeared. Shame found a voice, and with them came distance. The earth, which had given freely, began to resist. Work, which had been a song, turned into sweat. Childbirth, which would be a celebration, gained pain. Animals, once harmonious, learned to compete. It's hard to admit, but this echo crosses the centuries. Who has never felt the fatigue of a day that seems never-ending? Who has never suffered from a word spoken in haste? Who has never hidden behind excuses to avoid owning up? The fall is not only an ancient memory, it's a lens that helps explain our daily dilemmas. Even so, the last word was not abandonment. God sewed tunics to cover human vulnerability. There was justice, but there was care. Access to the tree of life was closed, not out of vengeance, but to prevent humanity from being eternally trapped in its wound. Cherubim and a flaming sword guarded the entrance, like sentinels of a future that could not yet be touched. And here is a mystery that threads through history. Eden was not destroyed. The garden remains guarded, like a veiled treasure, a sanctuary of memory and promise. Some see in it a physical place awaiting the right time, others a spiritual realm preserved for the final restoration. Either way, Eden points toward return, not escape, toward healing, not oblivion. When we look to the end of Scripture, the tree of life reappears, offering fruit for every season, with leaves that heal the nations. Isn't it curious that the story ends where it began? The river runs again through the heart of the city. The divine presence dwells among people once more, and hunger, tears, and death lose their breath. It's as if the first garden were the seed and the future city, the ripe fruit. But what does this narrative have to do with our ordinary Tuesday, with bills to pay and routines that wear us down? Everything, because the longing that inhabits us, for meaning, beauty, belonging, has an address in Eden. When you feel something is out of place, when you notice hurry devouring joy, when you suspect you were born for more than mere survival, it's the garden calling your name. Perhaps you're going through a season of hard work or relationships that seem to be falling apart. Perhaps you feel distant from God or from yourself. Eden reminds us it wasn't always this way, and it won't be forever. Between the beginning and the end, the story is one of reconciliation. Small gestures reopen pathways. Forgiving, asking forgiveness, cultivating, guarding, caring, naming with affection those who walk beside us. And what if today you chose a different step? If before the next decision you asked, which path draws me closer to life? Which word nourishes instead of wounds? Which posture aligns me with care, with guarding, with cultivation? Don't underestimate the power of a simple gesture. In Eden, one choice opened cracks. Now, choices can stitch them closed. It's also worth asking, where are your trees? What sources feed you? Which voices have you allowed near your attention? Some fruits look pleasant but empty you. Others demand patience but sustain you. Wisdom is not born of impulse. It is born of encounter, of listening, of trust. And if you feel far away, remember, the way back begins in the heart. A whispered prayer, a pause amid the rush, a word of thanks at day's end. That is how the evening breeze begins to touch the soul again. That is how the presence that has never abandoned the world finds room to warm the chest. Eden, after all, is more than a lost place. It is a horizon, a reminder of who we are and where we are headed. We were not created for permanent gray, but for a garden that blooms. We were not shaped for indifference, but for communion. We were not destined for rupture, but for restoration. That's why this story still matters. It invites us to reorder everyday life, to treat work as vocation, relationships as covenant, creation as home. It matters because by remembering the first garden, we also remember the future garden, where life overcomes weariness and hope is not theory. It is landscape. So the question remains, are you ready to rediscover Eden? to look beyond the fall and see the promise of a future in which humanity will once again live in full communion with God? If the answer is yes, begin today with a small yet decisive step. Choose life. Care for what has been entrusted to you. Rebuild a bridge. Reopen a conversation. Plant something that nourishes. And if you also believe there are mysteries hidden in Scripture and want to walk this journey with me, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapters of this search for meaning, beauty, and hope.